فلذلك فادع واستقم كما أمرت ولا تتبع أهواءهم وقل آمنت بما أنزل الله من كتاب.
الحمد لله وصلى الله وسلم على نبينا Muhammad وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. So inshallah today we're going to start up with a new subject, which inshallah will be something that's good for us to study, and it's very important that we study all of the different subjects that are out there that are important for each Muslim to know. And so the subject that we're going to start with a book, and the book is called the Mutn Abi Shujaa, which is Taqrib, by the Qadhi, which is like the name for judge, Abu Shujaa. And he was a person that was very well known at his time, and he was known to have lived a very, very long time. Some of the scholars, when they ask about how long did he live, some of them said he lived up to like 160 years. And this is the author of the book that we'll be studying. And this is then when he was asked about how did he live that long. One of the things that he said was, I kept my body parts away from sinning from Allah, and so I protected my body parts from sinning, so Allah protected my body parts in my old age. And this is something that is there's a beautiful sign of his taqwa and wara, and like the amount of like goodness and righteousness that he brought. And also this can be found in the barakah that like his book in and of itself has found acceptance within many different times, like from the time that he wrote this book when he was asked, we'll talk a little bit about that, until even our day and age. This is one of the first books that people that they read and they study alongside of their teachers when it comes to learning fiqh Shafi'i, when it comes to learning fiqh. And so just a brief introduction, because I know some of you maybe don't know exactly what is this subject in general. So I wanted to give just a brief introduction to what is fiqh and what are some of the things that we need to know inside of fiqh. So one of the definitions that that is given for what is fiqh itself, and it's knowing the rulings, the ahkam of the sharia, like the ahkam of the sharia, of knowing which the sharia of course is of the legislation that is for us in regards to what we do, like in regards to actions and what we do in a specific manner. And so this is what in general what fiqh is regarding, is like we're going to look at the rulings of different actions that we do. And so this the first things that we usually will start with are the ibadat, so like the things that are acts of worship. We'll start with these because this is the most important part. And usually fiqh is broken up into like 4 different sections. One is like the ibadat, which is like the acts of worship that we do, and within that usually there's the chapter regarding purity, as well as the chapter regarding salah, because this is the first thing really, and purity is something that comes before salah because it's a condition for salah. And then after the purity and the salah, then we go into the things that the Prophet ﷺ said, Bunya al-Islam ala khams. And then he said that Islam is built upon 5 things, and then the first thing, which was the shahadatain, the shahadatain la ilaha illallah wa anna Muhammadan Rasulullah. So this is usually discussed in aqidah. And then he said wa iqamis salah, and then this is the establishing of the prayer. So this is the first thing that we come into. Wa ita zakah, this is usually the second main thing that we study in that. And then he says, وَصَوْمِ Ramadan وَحَجِّ الْبَيْتِ. And so like these are the 5 things. And so we usually study these 4 things that he mentioned. The tawheed is something that is separate for like the shahada. But then we usually study these 4 things in this chapter of ibadat. And so it will be the salah, which of course before that we need to know how do we purify ourselves, and then after that we'll talk about zakah and what we need to know in regards to that, and then we'll talk about sawm and like fasting, and then we have and then we have after that Hajj, and we'll talk about that in Hajj and Umrah, because those two go hand in hand. And then after that, usually the next big section usually has to do with how do we deal with others in transactions. So this is like buying and selling, and if we're loaning something, or if we're giving orders, and what are the things that deal with riba, and what are the different things that are free from riba. This is the next section, which is like muamalat, which is how we deal with people. So the first one is how we deal with Allah, and the second one is how we deal with people. And then there's usually another section in regards to that, which is how do we deal with our family. And then that usually would encompass like nikah, which is the marriage, and then also the rulings regarding nikah and what is obligatory on the person, like in regards to spending and on his wife and on his children and the people that are around him, and other family matters such as talaq and different things related to that. And then after that, there's the subject that goes into other things such as like what we can eat. This is the next last subject, which covers a bunch of different things, but usually it covers like what do we eat, like hunting, also some of the things like if we have like sports and getting we call it musabaka, which is like if we had someone who was doing like archery for a prize or something of this sort, what are the rulings regarding this, as well as some of the other rulings regarding like qisas, like if somebody kills somebody else, what is expected in response to that, as well as some other things such as like if somebody steals, if they have the head, apply it or not, and these other rulings in regards to like judicial rulings. This is usually at the end, as well as like things regarding jihad. And in general, these are the topics that are usually covered in fiqh. And this is very important for us to know, especially at the beginning of this fiqh. And the things that we absolutely need to know are the things that keep us from doing something that is incorrect, and that makes sure that we are doing our ibadah properly. So if somebody is going to Hajj, they need to learn what is expected of them from Hajj, so that they make sure that their Hajj is accepted. And if somebody, of course, all of us as Muslims, we're praying, so we need to make sure that we learn about our prayer, to make sure that our prayer is acceptable, and that we aren't doing anything that invalidates our prayer, and that we take good care in our Tahara, our purity, and in regards to prayer. So of course we need to know the things that make our ibadah acceptable, as well as our transactions acceptable, and that we're not oppressing any other people. And so this is something that is the reason why we would study fiqh, is to make sure that that our actions are acceptable to Allah. And of course all of these actions, there's an exterior manner, which is that our actions need to be in accordance to the Sharia and what the Prophet ﷺ he legislated. And then there's also another manner in that the actions, they should always come with a pure intention. And of course these two go hand in hand. So one without the other is no good. So these are the two conditions for an action to be accepted. As one, it needs to have that pure intention, like it needs to be for Allah, and it needs to have that intention for to please Allah, and it can't be something of say someone is looking to show off or something of this sort. This is something that would ruin that action from being accepted. And then the other condition is that the action needs to be in accordance with what the Prophet ﷺ he brought and legislated. And if it's only one or the other, then this action is not something that's accepted as an action, and it needs to carry out these two conditions. And the basis of some of the where do these religious rulings and legislation, where does this come from? And basic, to keep it very, very simple, it comes from the Quran and the Sunnah. And so we have the Quran. If Allah says something in the Quran, then we take the ruling from that. And if the Prophet ﷺ he said something, or he did something, or he approved of somebody doing something, then we take the ruling of this as well from the Quran and Sunnah. And there's other areas where we also take rulings, such as qiyas. So if there's something that is like something that is mentioned in the Quran and the Sunnah, if there's something that's like it and there's no difference between that and something else, then this also takes a similar ruling. So Allah prohibited khamr, which is wine. So we'd also say that beer is prohibited, and as well as anything else that intoxicates is also prohibited because it carries the same meaning of intoxication. This is the reason it was prohibited, so this also takes that. This is what we'd call qiyas. And also there's ijma', which is the consensus of the ummah. If any of the ummah at any point in time, like if they all come together on a certain issue and they give a certain ruling for something, or they all say a certain thing about an issue, then of course this is the scholars that are knowledgeable about this issue. When they all come together on this issue and they say one thing, or if there's no difference of opinion in this, then this is the evidence that we look to, and it's one of the strongest of evidences in regards to how we get this, because the Prophet ﷺ said, "La tajtami'u ummati ala ad-dalal," and so the Prophet ﷺ, it's narrated that he said that my ummah will never come together upon something that is misguidance. And so also in the Quran, Allah it says that the person who goes against Allah and His Messenger, وَيَتَّبِعْ غَيْرَ سَبِيلِ الْمُؤْمِنِينَ, and whoever follows something other than the way of the believers, نُوَلِّهِ مَا تَوَلَّى, and that we make him love whatever he loves, like his desires and wishes, وَنُسْلِهِ جَهَنَّمْ, and then he gives him this stern warning of Jahannam, and that we make him taste Jahannam, وَسَاءَتْ مَصِيرًا. And it's a terrible end. And so this is something that we look to, and of course this comes originally, these all go back to the Quran and the Sunnah, but they are looked at in individual chapters, and this is something that's discussed in Usul Fiqh. How do we use these and when do we use this? And I will, inshallah, throughout this course, I will go back and point to some when these are used and how they're used sometimes, and you'll see like what's the evidence for this, because I don't want to just tell you do this without giving you any of the basis, but I want to make sure that you have some basis to go back to, that you can look to, and to get an understanding of where we're getting these rulings from. And also just a brief introduction to like the Shafi'i madhab, and there's 4 different madhabs that are that have made it to this day and age that are widely accepted. And of course we have the first one, which is the Hanafi madhab, which was started by Abu Hanifa. And of course he is, when it comes to like the time period, I'm going according to like the chronological order. So he was before, so he was the first of the ones whose madhabs reached us in the form of a madhab. And Imam Abu Hanifa, he taught, and he was a very, very strong scholar, and he taught people, and he was also the students who came from like the students of Ibn Mas'ud, radiallahu anhu, the Sahabi Ibn Mas'ud, and so he is from the students who came from him. And so he studied under them, and this is he came up with this madhab, and really it was his views and ijtihad, which is like him working hard to come to these rulings. And this is something that of course even to this day we see that this has a wide acceptance within like the Indo-Pakistan community as well as around the world. This is something that is accepted, and we'll see that people follow this madhab. And also Imam Malik, and may Allah have mercy on them. And Imam Malik came after this, and he was also a great scholar that taught for a long time in Medina. And he had many scholars that came after him that learned from him, and he was also a great muhaddith. He was someone who narrated much hadith, and he was also one of the first books that we have of hadith that we that made it around the world, is the Muwatta Ibn Malik, or Imam Malik. And Al-Muwatta is a book that is very, very well praised within the ulama. And this is something that Imam Shafi'i, he said, like this is the most correct book in the world at that time when it came to hadith. And this was something that's a good praise from Imam Shafi'i, which was also one of the students of Imam Maliki. So, and then to go into Imam Shafi'i, I'm just giving a brief introduction. Imam Shafi'i was the student of Imam Malik, and so he was a student of Imam Malik, and he was also a student of many other people that studied under the Sahabis. So originally he studied in Mecca, and he studied under some of the greatest scholars in Mecca, and then he also went to Medina and studied under Imam Maliki, and he was a very, very close student of his, and studied under him for a long time until he passed. And then he went and also studied under the two best students of Abu Hanifa after that, to make sure that he blended all the different knowledge that was out there. He wanted to make sure he was exposed to all of this, and of course this is one of the beauties of like Imam Shafi, and also like of the scholars in general, that are open-minded to hearing the different opinions, and they're not closed-minded to only hearing the opinion of one person or another person, and they don't want to hear what everyone else has to say. No, he wanted to hear what everyone has to say, and then he would take their opinions and come to an understanding for himself in this. And he was also known as a very, 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 very brilliant individual, and also had a very, very strong comprehension of the Arabic language, and was sent to like at a young age to go learn Arabic. And he was very, very knowledgeable when it comes to like the poetry of Arabic poetry, and is also like he is a proof when it comes to like the people of Arabic language. If they see that Imam Shafi said something and in Arabic, then whatever he said is always going to be correct. Because of his level of Arabic was never distorted and whatnot. It was a very high level of Arabic. And also this goes into, and Imam Shafi also is one of the first people who wrote, he's the first person who wrote in Usul al-Fiqh, a book that was just for Usul al-Fiqh, which is al-Risala. And he wrote this book in Usul al-Fiqh. And also he wrote a lot inside of this book. It's not just Usul al-Fiqh, but it also carries a lot of Mustalah al-Hadith, like this, of how we take Hadith, and how do we look at the people that are in the Hadith and how it comes to us, and are the Hadith a proof? Like how are these Hadith a proof if it came from like just a few people? How is this a proof upon us? And so he brings these in his book Al-Risala, and also he wrote many other books as well. And this is one of the defining characteristics of Imam Shafi, is that out of all of the four Imams that came after this, he is the only one that actually put down his views in fiqh. He's the only one that wrote them down in a book form, and actually made sure that his books were given for people to know what they are, so that the people coming after them, they could read his books and his rulings, his religious rulings. And Abu Hanifa, he wrote like some works, but when it comes to like putting together all of his fiqh in like an actual book, or putting together like his usul, like his foundations of getting information from this was something that he didn't put together this, but rather his students afterwards, from his rulings and from like the conversations that they had with him, they came up with his foundations, like where he came from. They took this from what he had given from that, and this is a different way of going about it, because they didn't necessarily have all of his views when it came to these things, when it came to usul al-fiqh. But Imam Shafi is the first one who wrote in this field, and he also is like very, very knowledgeable in that. And also his works as a muhaddith are also praised as well, as he was a student of Imam Malik, which was also a serious muhaddith, someone that was involved in hadith and narrating hadith. And so also the Imam Shafi was also a student of his when it comes to hadith as well, and contributed a great role when it comes to hadith, as well as one of the students of, I'll move on to the last of the four madhabs. One of the students of Imam Shafi was Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal, and I talked a little bit about him yesterday in regards to his stance when it came to Aqidah and standing for the truth, and like the persecution that he stood up in light of. And he was also a serious muhaddith when it came to giving many narrations and bringing together the narrations of hadith, and also when it comes to talking about who are the narrators that are trustworthy and untrustworthy. And this is something that he is a very, very well known person in this field of hadith. And also he had many fatwa, or like different rulings that he gave out in regards to in regards to like fiqh, to fiqh issues. And this is also something that his students later, they combined this and they made a madhab of what he said afterwards. But he originally was not someone who was trying to make a madhab for himself, a fiqh, and he told a lot of his students like not to write in those certain sessions, not to write down what he said, because this was something that was from his own ijtihad, and this was not something that he was necessarily looking for to make a madhab from what he was doing. But of course, like his views were strong, and so his students afterwards, after he passed, they put together his views and combined them so that later it was made into a madhab from his students. And so sometimes there's differences between all of these madhabs, and in general the madhabs, they encompass all of the views of the Sahaba. And so like the Sahaba, they would have certain views when there's something that's unclear. So maybe one person reached them a text of like the Sunnah that another person didn't reach. So there'd be a difference of opinion from one Sahaba to another. And this same difference of opinion many times would get carried into their students and their students, which ended up being these four imams. And usually all the difference of the opinions from these first three generations of the Salaf, they usually are found inside or are encompassed within the four madhabs. And sometimes there'll be multiple opinions inside of a madhab, and one of them will be the strong opinion inside of the madhab. And these differences of opinion, they happen when there is a text that can be understood in multiple ways, or there's a disagreement about whether this hadith is authentic or not. Or and there's some other differences of opinion on whether or not like this, when it comes to like qiyas, if somebody's using qiyas, there will be differences in understanding of how somebody uses qiyas. And of course, this is a subject that takes a lot of depth and going into, which is studied like inside of usul al-fiqh. But in these differences of opinion, as long as there's no, when it comes to us as like lay people, as long as there's no clear-cut text that can't be understood in another way that points to a certain view, then to take one of these opinions of a trusted imam or of something, this is something that's okay. Of course, not falling into always taking the easiest opinion in every single case, but rather making sure that someone is being careful with that. Of course, as I mentioned in the last class about that, it's impermissible to always go looking for the easiest thing and always taking the easiest view in every single thing. But when there are these differences of opinion, one person that holds on to one opinion and another person that holds on to another opinion, we don't make a big we don't bicker and fuss about the person who holds this opinion or this opinion, but rather this is something, as long as there's a way that they understand it and whatnot, then we agree to disagree in these matters of fiqh especially. And when it comes to Aqidah, this is a different area because most of Aqidah is a clear-cut text that somebody, if they go against it, then they're going against a clear-cut text or they're going against ijma'. And this is why there's not a lot of, there should never be disagreement except in like minor issues when it comes to Aqidah. But when we come to fiqh, there'll be more differences of opinion. And of course, always trying to stay on the strongest, the side that you will be pleasing most of the views, or like that you'll be in accordance with most of the views, is always the best thing to do. So if some people say that something is obligatory, and then some people say it's only mustahab, we'll talk about these, that if you do it, then you're gonna be doing something that's mustahab with this person, you're doing something that's obligatory on this person, there's no sin upon you. But if you don't do it because you think it's mustahab, then you've fallen into something that goes against the person who says that it was obligatory. And so like trying to figure out where you can put these together is something that is good, to make sure that you don't ever like fall into a place where only like a minority is saying that you're on the right path. And so of course this is something that comes into like if somebody's heart is pure and whatnot and they want to please Allah, then this is something that they will come into, and they will work to do their best to come with everything that they can, and of course following a certain madhab for a student is the best way for someone to go. So of course as a student, I originally was studying the Hanbali madhab, because this is the only thing that was available to me in English. And then once I got to Egypt and I study under a sheikh here, as well as some other students of knowledge, then I went with the Shafi'i Madhahib because of the amount of resources available. And this is also the one that is my specialization as I'm studying in Jamiat al-Azhar, the University of Azhar. So I study in the Kulliyat al-Sharia, which is the branch in regards to Sharia, which is like fiqh and whatnot. And my specialization is in Shafi'i Fiqh. And so most of what I teach will be from the point of the Shafi'i Fiqh, but I will point to some differences of opinion here and there if there's a benefit or something that helps out the person for them to know that this is there and to make things easier for them, and in a way that is good, of course. And then the next thing is that we should also understand when we have the Quran and the Sunnah, if we look at these things, there's never going to be a real contradiction between them. There's always a way that it should always come together. If the Sunnah is authentic, and the Quran, of course, there's no doubt in its authenticity, then they will always be brought together, and all of the Sunnah will always be brought together with all the other authentic Sunnah, and there is never really a difference, like they will never contradict each other in reality. Even if there seems to be a contradiction here or there, this is something that only happens because somebody didn't look into it deeper and see how it fits together. And this is like one of the jobs of like someone who's a faqih, is to always look into these the different texts and see how they come together, because they always explain each other. And so it's important that we always bring it all together, and we don't just take one hadith or one ayat out of context of the rest of the hadith and the ayats that are out there, and then come up to an understanding from something in its isolated text, but rather we have to take everything in it together. And some of the benefits of studying fiqh, as I mentioned before, to make sure that our worship is acceptable for Allah, and make sure that we have an understanding of that. And also, knowledge gives a peace in times of confusion. So if you have someone who is unsure about a certain matter, and we have like this opinion, say if somebody doesn't have a basis of studying fiqh, then this is something that they will be unsure, and they'll be thrown about, and maybe they find themselves in a state of confusion or turmoil because they don't understand what's going on. But if somebody has studied fiqh, then they know that this gives them a peace of mind because they've studied this, and this is something they understand. Okay, it could be this way or it could be this way, and we're doing it this way. Okay, this is something that is a established position. You know, they know like this is an established position, and they also know on the opposite side if something is clearly wrong, because they've studied it and they can see it from a clear point, even instead of just thinking like they have like some feeling that this is wrong. They would actually know this is wrong because it goes against this hadith and this ayah, you know. And this is something that someone who studies fiqh, they become very much more at peace when it comes to these issues that may come from time to time. And also, if somebody doesn't know what to do in a certain situation, if they studied in fiqh, then it would tell them what they should do in that situation. Say somebody forgot to, somebody prayed dhuhr and they only prayed 3 rak'ah. And then they realize after they gave the salams, they're like, oh, I only prayed 3 rak'ah. What do I do? You know, I'm supposed to pray 4. You know, like, okay, then you make you pick up where you left off, you finish with the 4th, and then you make the 2 sujood for having the forgetfulness. And then you make salam after that. And so like someone who studied this, then this is easy for them. But if someone who hasn't studied, maybe they get very confused. What am I supposed to do? Oh no. And they panic or something. But this is someone who studies, they will have this peace in times of confusion. And also it's one of the best forms of worship. And studying and seeking knowledge is one of the best forms of worship that somebody can do to seek the pleasure of Allah. And of course someone should always have the right niyyah when they're coming into studying fiqh and studying the Quran and the Sunnah, so that they have that niyyah first to relieve the to lift the jahl or the ignorance from themselves, as well as to lift the ignorance from the people that are around them, to teach them as well. And they shouldn't be like learning this for the fact for people to say this person's a alim or this person's a knowledgeable person and whatnot, but rather they're doing this for the pleasure of Allah. And this is the most important thing, that someone has this correct niyyah. And this is because this studying and the sitting in the class, learning and whatnot, is one of the best forms of worship that a person can do. And of course, if somebody is worshiping without knowledge, then this worship maybe is acceptable, and maybe it's not acceptable. But someone who worships on knowledge, then this is something that as long as they have that correct niyyah, then this is something that is acceptable. Talking about those conditions for something to be accepted. And also this is the Prophet ﷺ said, "Man yuridillahu bihi khayran yufaqihu fi din," that the Prophet ﷺ said, whoever Allah wants good for him, then He gives him fiqh in the deen, like He makes him someone who understands in the deen. And so this is like a sign that if somebody is studying fiqh and they're learning fiqh, that this is a sign that Allah wants good for them, because He is giving them that fiqh in the deen. And this is a sign, of course, when someone is learning. Of course, we never say that we know that Allah wants good for us because I'm sitting here, but we hope and we have this raja, or like this a hopeful expectation that Allah wants good for us and that He's accepting from us for this. And when we see ourselves that we're studying and we're learning in the religion, we can see this as a sign that this is probably a sign that Allah wants good for us and is helping us in this way. And also it protects someone from displeasing Allah in some of their actions without knowing, And of course, the person who doesn't seek the knowledge that's required of them to seek, they are held at blame because this person didn't seek the knowledge that they were supposed to know. So if somebody say they go to Hajj and they didn't study before they go to Hajj what they were supposed to be doing, and the different things that go against, like the ihram, which is like a state of being that the person that's doing Hajj needs to be in a state of being, which he doesn't cut his hair, he also doesn't cut his fingernails, he also doesn't put on anything that's has like any strong, or anything that has any scent on it. He doesn't put it on his body, such as like cologne or even like scented shampoo. Like this is something that the person who's in Hajj or in Ihram, he doesn't do these things. So if somebody didn't study this beforehand, they could be falling into things that are impermissible for them without even knowing it after that. And the reason for that would be because they didn't study. So it's very important that somebody studies to make sure that they do that. And of course, the benefits of this are more than can be even like enumerated. And inshallah, we'll leave it at that for the benefits here, and we'll get started with the book for today, and get started with the introduction. And inshallah, we'll start here. I have been translating this book for myself, and I have the translation that's available on a PDF, or not a PDF, but it's on a Google Drive. And so y'all can look at it and read this. And I basically translated this to be easy for the English reader, because there is another translation that's out there, but I found it to be difficult. Some of the words were very strange, and it was hard to understand because it's more kind of like a literal interpretation. And some of the words are strange for like an English English speaker to even understand what it means. So I made this a little bit easier for the person who's studying the Mutn Abi Shujaa, and I called it The Goal in Bringing It Close, which is al-ghayatu wa taqrib. This is like the meaning of it. And so also, and I talked about some of the different terms that we come into. And also there's these terms that will come up here and there. It'll be wajib and fard. These are normally two different terms that come to mean the same thing. It's something that Allah has asked for you to do in a way that you have no choice in the matter of. And this is a wajib or fard. And then there's another way, which is a sunnah or mustahab or mandub. This is another form which Allah has asked for you to do this thing, but rather this is something that if you do it, then it is something that you're rewarded for, and if you don't do it, then there's no punishment upon you. And so like an example of wajib or fard would be like salah. Salah is something that's obligatory for the person to do, and something that is like an example of sunnah is like giving salams on somebody when you come into a room. You give salams on the people that are there. You say assalamu alaikum. This is something that's sunnah for someone to do, and this is mustahab, and this is something that's preferred. And if somebody walked in, they didn't say salam, this is something they won't necessarily be punished for. Of course, returning the salam is something that is wajib for at least one person to do, which is a wajib, which is like a fard kifaya, which is obligatory for at least one person from the group to give salams in return. This is something that's obligatory. And so I will sometimes say that this must be done or it has to be done. This is something I mean by fard or wajib. And if I say this is good, better, preferred, like this, or sunnah, this is something that is that the person who does it, they'll be rewarded for it, and if they don't do it, then there's no sin upon them. And then also, this is okay or permissible. This is the other rank. So you have like the fard, which is you need to come with this action. The next one under it is this is good for you to come with this action. And the next one under it is there's no difference between if you do it or if you don't do it. And of course, there's grades between all of these. There's levels between all of them that you can't necessarily cut it up and exactly like this. There's no difference between it, but in general, something that is mubah or halal, this means that there's no sin on you for if you do it, and if you do it, there's not any reward connected to it because of what it is. Like maybe for another reason, there's a reward connected to it, but in and of itself, it's not something that is asked or required of you, and it's not something that you're prohibited from. This is something that would be mubah or halal, which is okay, permissible, allowed, no problem with it. And also some of the other words is like jaiz, which means it's permissible. And if somebody says غير جائز or لا يجوز, this means it's not permissible. And so then the next of these, there's 5 of these ways that we'll talk about here, and is like if something is disliked. So if the Sharia tells you not to do something, it could either be you have a choice, like this is like a recommendation for you not to do this. And if it's a recommendation, then this is something that's makruh. It's something that's disliked for this person to do it. Or it's something that is that it's not a recommendation, but rather it's a prohibition. And this is something that is haram. And so I will sometimes say like this is disliked or it's not the best, it's better to leave it. And this means like makruh. And if it's not okay, it's impermissible, not allowed, this means like haram, which is the person that does something that's haram, they're subjected to a punishment for doing it. And so this is something, these are the 5 different terms that someone should be aware of when it comes to fiqh. One is that it's wajib or fard, which means that it's obligatory to do it. And like mustahab, sunnah, mandub, these are all terms that mean this is something that is good to do, but there's no punishment for leaving it. As opposed to the fard or wajib, if you leave it, there's a punishment involved in that if Allah decides to punish you for it. And so, and then there's the mubah, or the thing that is halal. It's something that's permissible for you to do. And then there is the thing that is recommended for you to leave it, which is makruh. And then there's the thing that you're commanded to leave it, and you have no choice in the matter. And that's that is the haram, or it's also called mahdur. And there's other terms that are used like la yajuz or ghayru jaiz. And so these are some of the terms that may come up here and there. And I ask Allah to accept this work from me in the translation. So going into the beginning of what the author here he gives, and I have the Arabic on the side here for those who wish to read it. And as far as this goes, I'll read it in English for time's sake. He says, all praise, so the introduction of the mu'allif, he says here, all praises to Allah, alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen, and then he says, wa sallallahu wa sallam ala nabi sayyidina Muhammadin, an-nabi wa alihi wa at-tahirina, wa sahabatihi ajma'in. And he says, and may the peace and blessings be upon our leader Muhammad, the seal of the prophets, and also upon his pure followers and companions. And then here he says, some of my friends asked me to make a small, concise book in fiqh in the school of Imam Shafi'i, the Madhahib of Imam Shafi'i, may Allah have mercy on him and be pleased with him, with the intent of brevity and the fullest extent of concision, like to be concise, so that it will give the student what he needs to learn simply, to help the beginner to memorize it, to break things down into categories and make the rulings clear. And so these are some of the things that he puts here as his goals in this. And this is something that's very important because he tries to make sure that everything is put simply, as well as it's in a form that the student can easily memorize it, and also make sure if there's different categories in regards to something, as we'll see, he breaks everything down into categories, which helps the person understand it, as well as he makes sure that the rulings are clear for people. And so he says here, rahimahullah, so I answered them, wanting Allah to reward me and guide me to what is correct, and he is able to do whatever he desires, and is aware and intimately acquainted with his servants, and may Allah accept this from him. And we see that Allah has given him acceptance with the ummah with this work. It's something that's a very well known work. And so the first book here, so he begins here with Kitab al-Tahara. And he says here there are 7 different types of water. And so the first thing that he starts off when he talks about the book of Tahara is, as we talked about, Tahara is the shart, or the condition for the salah. And so, of course, the condition for the salah would come before the salah itself. So talking about Tahara is like talking about something that is necessary for salah. So he starts with this. In Tahara, there's 2 types of it. One of it is the Tahara of the body, and the sense of it's not impure. And then also there's also Tahara of the heart, which is making sure that the heart is pure. And this is something that is talked about in Tawheed. And here we're talking about the Tahara that is in regards to the person. So the Tahara can be in regards to something that is physical, such as if there's something that's najis, and we'll talk about what these are. And this is something that is a physical thing that negates Tahara. Such as if somebody stepped in dog poop or something. This is something that's najis, and this is a physical thing that needs to be washed. It needs to be cleaned from this person's shoe or whatever. And so this is an example of something that needs to be cleaned for this person's salat to be accepted. And also there's a meaning of tahara, which also comes to this person is not mutawaddi, or this person is not on wudu. And so if this person doesn't have wudu, then this person is in a state where he needs to raise this state of impurity until he can pray. And so here he talks about, the first thing he talks about when he talks about tahara here is he talks about water, because water is the main thing that we use to make tahara with. And he breaks water into 7 different categories here. And he says, المياه التي يجوز بها التطهير 7 مياه ماء السماء وماء البحر وماء النهر وماء البئر وماء العين وماء الثلج وماء البرد. And so here he says there's 7 types of water that are permissible to use to purify. And so here he says the first one, which is ma'us sama, which is the rainwater. It's the water that comes down from the sky, which is the sama. And then the next one, which is the seawater, ma'ul bahri. And this is even though it has the salt, it's salt water. This is still something that is able for someone to use to make purity with. And the Prophet ﷺ, when he was asked about the water from someone who was on a journey in the sea, he was asked about if they can make wudu from it. And then the Prophet ﷺ said that huwa tahuru ma'uhu. And so that the Prophet ﷺ said huwa tahuru ma'uhu, that it's water is something that is pure for you. Wal hillu maytatuhu. And that also it's the things that died in the ocean are also are permissible for you to eat. So he also gave him an extra benefit in his response, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And so this is so we can use the seawater. We can also use rainwater. We can also use, he says here, ma'u nahri, which is river water, and then he says ma'u bi'r, which is well water, and ma'ul ayn, which is spring water, and also water from hail or snow, or water from glaciers. And so these are all these different types of waters. You could break it up in another category, which is water that comes from the sky and water that comes from from the earth. And in general, these waters are something that is permissible to use. And in a more general sense, any water that you would consider water without putting any other term on top of it is something that's permissible for you to use. So if you were to ask someone for water in general without saying anything, and he came to you with water that was mixed with tea, and this is no longer what you would call water. This is something else. If he came to you water that has been mixed with Kool-Aid, this isn't water. This isn't what you asked for. But rather water that is known as water, then this is something that can be used. Whether it's found in all of these different places and whatnot, that's something that as long as it is water, that isn't mixed with something else that changes its name, then it's something that can be used. And then here he gives another categories of water here. He says, ثُمَّ الْمِيَاهُ عَلَى أَرْبَعَةِ أَقْسَامٍ. Then he says that this miyah this water is, and there's four categories of this water, and there's 4 types of it. And he says the first one, and we'll look at this because he gives them 4 categories. The first one he gives is that this is water that is pure and purifying, and that's not disliked. And then he gives another one which is also pure and purifying, that's disliked. And then there's also, to skip to the next one, there's pure water that can't purify. So it's something that isn't najis, he means. And then there's also unclean najis water that is that you can't, of course, it's unclean, so you can't purify with that. And so these are the 4 different categories of water. And in general, there's one type of category which you can purify with, you can use, and there's another one that you can't purify with. And then there's 2 types for each one of these. Inshallah, so we'll talk just a little bit about this. The first one, which is important for us to know, like the pure purifying water, he says here, is طاهر مطهر غير مكروه وهو الماء المطلق. And so he says the first type here is tahir, which means that it's pure, and it's also mutahhir, which is purifying, and غير مكروه, that it's not disliked or makruh. And this is plain water. So it's any water that you would consider water. Then this is something that is permissible for you to use, and there's no problem with it, and it's not makruh, which I mentioned before is disliked. So if you would leave it, then there's a benefit for you leaving it. And then the second one that he gives here is also, he says, وَطَاهِرٌ مُطَهِّرٌ مَكْرُوهٌ وَهُوَ الْمَاءُ الْمُشَمَّسُ. And then he says here that there's the second type here is also pure. It's also purifying. So it would raise, like if you used it for wudu, it would work for you, and it would raise the state of impurity. But then he says that this is something that is makruh, that's something that's disliked. And he says mushammas, and this is something that is mentioned, and the reason that he mentions this is there's a like a athar, which is like, it's not like you would have a hadith, which is something that's that goes back to the Prophet ﷺ, and then you have athar, which is something that goes back to one of the Sahabis. And so there's a athar that is from Umar radiallahu anhu that someone who uses water that is mushammas, which we'll talk about here, then this would give them a certain skin disease. And so because of that, this is something that is considered disliked, that the author here, he says it's disliked. And this mushammas is a hot water. I put a description here. It's hot water that's heated from the sun in a molten metal basin in a hot land that could cause skin disease. So with all of these conditions, that it's hot water, that's still hot, that it's heated from the sun, being in it, and a molten metal basin. So it's not like molten right now, but it's something that is a metal basin, and that was in a hot land, and that could also cause skin disease. So sometimes there would be like a brass basin, which is like or copper and whatnot. And if there's one of these brass basins that was sitting out in the sun, say in Saudi Arabia, the sun is very, very hot, and if someone were to make wudu from this, there would be a smell from this water. There would even be like a smell to the water because it would change because of the copper and whatnot. And this is something that is recommended for someone not to do because of the harm involved in it. And of course, the Prophet ﷺ, he said, "La darar wala dirar," which is like there's no harming or reciprocation in harm. So if something is gonna hurt you, like from using a certain type of water, and there's like a health precaution in using this water, like something that's going to affect your health, then it's best for you to leave off this water and use a water that's not going to affect your health. And in a general sense, this is something that is prescribed for someone to leave off something that's going to have like a negative health consequence when they have the ability to use something other than this. And this is something that the Shafi'i Madhahib, they talk about this water mushammas, and some of the scholars have said this is not disliked as long as it goes back to the health. Like, do the doctors say that this water is going to cause any harm, or is it not going to cause harm? If they say it's going to cause harm, then it's disliked, and if they say it's not going to cause harm, then it's not disliked. And so this is the go-to is to see is this causing harm or not. And so then the next thing that he gives here is he says then there's pure water that can't purify. And this is water that if it got on your clothes, it's not going to invalidate your salah because it's impure. No, it's pure, but it's water that can't purify. And why is that? And he says here that because وَطَاهِرٌ غَيْرُ مُطَهِّرٌ وَهُوَ الْمَاءُ الْمُسْتَعْمَلُ. And so he gives a couple different categories inside of this. And so he says this is pure purifying water or it's pure water that can't purify. And he gives 2 categories under that. He says ma musta'man, and it's water that's already used to purify. So it's water that's already raised the impurity from your body by using this water. So if you washed your face, that water that comes down from your face the first time that you washed it, then this water is something that if you were to gather all this water and try to use it again, then this would be something that, according to his view here, that it wouldn't be like, it would be something that wouldn't purify. Again, after it's purified once, it wouldn't purify another time. And this is the view of the Shafi'i Madhahib, that they have basically been by themselves in this view. And most people, most of the other madhabs, they don't necessarily view it this way. And also, the reality of the situation is this water is very little, and so someone actually using this water is very like impractical for someone to actually use this water. And it's not like the norm that someone would like pick up the water that came off of them from the first time that they washed themselves to use it again. And so this is that ma'u musta'man. So he says here that it's something that's tahir, like it's not dirty, like this water is not dirty that came down from washing someone's face or washing their hands for the first time, making wudu. Then this is something that isn't dirty, or it's not najis, but at the same time you can't use it again after it's been used once. It's water that's already been used and to purify, and so you can't use it again, so it can't purify more than one time. And so this is his view here. And then the next one is that, or he says وَالْمُتَغَيِّرُ بِمَا خَالَتُهُ مِنَ الطَّاهِرَاتِ, and then also or that's been changed from pure things being mixed with it, mixed in it. So if you have, say you have water, and the water has been mixed with it, something such as like if I were to take like tea, if I were to take tea and throw it into water, that the thing that I threw in that water is something that changes the composition of that water. So it's changed with something that the tea is pure, and then the water is also, it doesn't change from being impure, but it doesn't have the ability to raise the hadith because it's not still water. And so it's something that's been changed from other things being mixed into it. And so this is another type of water that he says here, and this is something that wouldn't raise the state of impurity by using it, and rather it needs to be water that hasn't been mixed with these other things in them. And this is just because normally you wouldn't call this water, except that you would come up with another name on top of it. So if you had like water that was mixed with like tea crumbs, you would say, or like the tea powder, you would say that this is tea. You wouldn't say that this is water anymore, even though in its essence it's water. You know, and the same thing, if you had water that's mixed with, say I were to put like laundry detergent in the water. Now the water is mixed with another thing. I would not be able to drink this water. I wouldn't ask someone, if someone asked them to get me some water, and they gave me some water that was mixed with laundry detergent, I'm not going to drink this, you know. So this is something that you wouldn't call it as water by itself. And so it changed its name from being water, like at its normal, like being water, to being something else. Of course, like if it's water that's found in a puddle or something, this is still water, you know, even though it's kind of dirty. But this is something that you would still call it water. And then the last type here, which is also another type that can't be used to purify, is water that's najis. And if this is water that's something unclean has fallen into, less than 195 liters, or like 200, some say, approximately. Inshallah, we'll stop here in this for this class because of the time. Inshallah, we'll pick back up with these categories of water and review them in the next class. And if there's any questions about what we went over, feel free to ask. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.
فلذلك فادع واستقم كما أمرت ولا تتبع أهواءهم وقل آمنت بما أنزل الله من كتاب وأمرت لأعدل بينكم الله ربنا وربكم لنا أعمالنا ولكم أعمالكم لا حجة بيننا وبينكم الله يجمع بيننا وإليه المصير.